5:30. So I will open up tonight's meeting, December 23rd, 2024, our final city council meeting of the year. Just a reminder, please mute your calls, please turn off all cell phones, texting, any notifications except for emergency personnel. And then if you're on Zoom, please mute until we call on you. Amy, will you please do roll call?
Mayor Giordani.
Yes.
Councilmember Obanoff.
Yes.
Councilmember Shea.
Yes.
Councilmember Herrero.
Yes.
Councilmember Mahoney.
Yes.
Councilmember Leahy.
Yes.
Notice of agenda compliance. Funding of the regular meeting and agenda were posted in accordance with Idaho Code 74-204 within 48 hours prior to the meeting at the City of Bellevue City Hall, Post Office, and on the city's website on December 19th, 2024.
I will move that the notice for the December 23rd, 2024 meeting was completed in accordance with Idaho Code section 74-204.
Second. All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Call for conflict, as outlined in Idaho Code 74-404. Any conflict with
No.
tonight's?
No.
No. Okay. We'll move into item 3, mayor and council reports. I'll get us started off. I just wanted to start by saying thank you to the staff who have been very gracious for the last 2 weeks, taking meetings with me, getting me educated, onboarded, being open to expressing, anything that I've been talking to you about, to our contractors for taking the time to take meetings with me, and have like in-depth conversations about a lot of the things that, we're not privy to just being on council. So diving in a little bit more, in this mayor position and trying to get a full scope of understanding, of what's happening as we round out the end of the year. And then moving into just wanting to have a reminder, about parking in the right of way. It's snow season. Our plows are actively out there doing their best to push snow when we get these storms. So just a reminder to make sure your vehicle's not parked in a snow removal area overnight. Towing has happened. There will be more towing, so just please watch where your vehicles are being parked. And thank you to our plow team internally and our contractors for doing a great job so far. Wanted to acknowledge that we know, via communication from the residents of the Chantrell area, that there is a water pressure issue. We're aware that there is an issue. The water team is investigating what the cause of that issue is. And as soon as we can get an answer for you on the cause of that issue, and work towards a solution, we will be in touch to communicate back to the residents, and the greater community. So thank you for bringing it to our attention so that we can continue to try and diagnose the problem. And then just a final, I wanted to say thank you to Robin and John. This being our last council meeting together. Just want to thank you so much for your service to the city. And we just appreciate all the time you spent serving on council and dedicating your time to the community. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
And wanted to open it up if there's any council reports or updates.
No, I don't believe I have anything.
One more thing I thought of, just want to make the community aware that we do have an opening on our planning and zoning commission. And at this time with the transition, we have an opening on our city council. So if there's any interest, anyone in the community who'd like to throw their hat in to serve in either of those seats, a 1-year term on city council or a P&Z seat, please feel free to contact me, the mayor, directly, our city clerk, Brian Parker with the community development. We've received letters of interest so far. So if you'd like to be considered, please reach out. We will be looking to make those appointments on the January 13th meeting. So just please note. Okay. Well, thank you. I'll move on to public comment. This is for items of concern not on the agenda. And please limit comments 3 to 5 minutes. So opening up public comment, if anyone has any comments. Not seeing any in the audience, and I don't see any hands raised on Zoom. I will go ahead then and close public comment. Moving on to item 5, consent agenda. Before we get started on that, I wanted to pull item D off the consent agenda and table it. When the agenda was put together, we received information about this outstanding bill, and understanding that we were coming to the end of the year, we were trying to close out outstanding debts and take care of it. But upon further investigation into the amount owed and a little bit of discrepancy on how we arrived at that number, I don't feel comfortable in good faith advising council to move forward with this payment until there's a little bit more investigation into how we arrived at that sum as an invoice. So I'm going to remove that item from the agenda and table it. Any other items that you'd like to discuss on the consent agenda?
I have one, and that is, on the December 9th minutes. There's a short paragraph in here that says Council Member Shea commented that there should be language in the agenda stating cutoff times for public comment. And I want to make sure that we clarify that that cutoff time that I was talking about was for us receiving written comment and not public comments. Cause I don't want this to have the appearance to anyone that we're limiting public comment. And so, I've discussed this with Amy earlier today and I think she's made that correction, so.
Are you done, Di?
I am.
Okay. I was kind of wondering about what is the Caterpillar Financial Services, the wheel loader that's split into the streets, water and wastewater?
The 10 grand each,
Mm-hmm,
that's an annual payment.
okay,
This was a loader that was authorized by previous year council.
Okay.
That we inherited, so
Okay.
it just didn't arrive until this last fiscal year.
okay, that's
So
what
that's
that
the
is.
annual payment.
Okay, great. That is the only thing I had questions on with that, thank you.
Did you have anything else on there that you wanted to? Okay. I'll go ahead and move to approve the consent agenda.
I did have
Oh,
one
I'm
quick
sorry,
comment.
I'm sorry.
I love always seeing the department head reports, and it'd be great to get them from every department every time.
I think with this being a meeting that was going to be moved and got back on, we had a little bit of a gap in that, but I agree. And I think, you know, as we continue to fill up the departments, that will be something that we'd like to see happening with consistency.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
And exciting to see we've got somebody starting at the fire academy, right?
Yep.
That's cool.
Great.
So.
And a slow speechless.
I got a call today from an ex-firefighter that's back too, so hopefully it'll work out for him to rejoin.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
I will go ahead and move to approve the consent agenda as amended.
Second.
Yeah,
Okay. Councilmember Mahoney,
yep,
Councilmember Leahy,
Yes.
Councilmember Carrero,
yes,
Councilmember Shea,
Yes.
Councilmember Obanoff.
Yes.
Move on to item number 6, new business. This is a discussion and consideration of options with respect to the 61.01 acres of city-owned property, Blaine County parcel number, long number there, but we can all read. RPV 0417000000B0, north of Cowcatcher Loop and east of Slaughterhouse Road. With, Brian and I kind of discussed putting this on the agenda, with this being an, appraisal document in here that was approved, the funding to spend to get the appraisal by this council. I wanted to make sure it got brought back to this council now that we received the document, to give everyone an opportunity to kind of review it and have a discussion about it. So that's why we're seeing that on the agenda tonight. Brian, would you like to lead us?
All right, yes, thank you, Mayor Giordani, Brian Parker, Community Development Director. So we received the appraisal back on the 61-acre parcel that we own at the far end of the Strayer development. Roughly $2 million. I put together a little memo with a bunch of potential options that is not an exhaustive list by any means, but just kind of some categories. What I think would be productive for tonight is just to discuss where in the spectrum of we want to maximize revenue, even if it means we're putting a nuclear power plant at the end of the road, to let's feed it over to a squirrel. Where do we fall between those two? And then staff can come up with some routes on where to go.
Hands on the squirrel.
I mean, from the conversations everyone's been having about this property and the location of where it is, I mean, obviously, yes, we do need housing, but, one of the thoughts is like, can we trade? Can we exchange the property with someone else? I'm just more thinking about, it's a floodplain, avalanche, fires, like back there. So, I don't know if there's been further discussion with the Oppenheimers or other annexations with what we can do with that land. So that's my thought process on it. Also just, the infrastructure going out there as well.
And I'll also add Chad Stowitz.
Yes.
Okay, from the Woodruff Land Trust is online, if anybody has any questions on that side of things.
So Chad, what would that look like?
Hi, Chad Stays, Woodruff Land Trust. Well, we have used the Land and Water Conservation Fund pot of money, which the federal government has made available to help the BLM acquire different properties around the state. And so what that option could look like is the city working with the land trust to put in an application to the BLM for acquiring this property. And there's a certain number of due diligence things that have to be satisfied, but often they're able to purchase property basically at the appraised value. The process is not super quick, but it's also not as long as some of the more involved acquisition programs that are out there. So it is something that the council could consider, and the land trust would be happy to be the entity sponsor for that program or for that project.
Thank you.
Brian, how much buildable acreage is out there that's not within the avalanche district?
I don't know for sure, and it would depend on what you consider buildable in the floodplain. You could elevate structures out of the floodplain and do that sort of thing. But yeah, real comprehensive look at it. Jeff Pashley is also here in the audience that may also.
Hi, Jeff. I'm disappointed. I was hoping Tom Blanchard would be here, but I guess it's just me. Arguably, I probably have the most experience with the property because I owned it. And prior to entering into negotiations to be in the city, I actually had researched a number of the things that Brian, nice job with some of your ideas here. Some of the ideas that you all should be considering. Before I came to the city, I actually had pretty much arranged something with the land trust, so it's not surprising that they could, you know, jump in at this point and where I would do potentially some, well, I only asked for the first mile to come into the city because I felt the last mile really, in my mind, would be most suited as open space for all sorts of reasons. And you know, you don't want to go through a quickly process. So, I'd worked with the land trust and they were willing to consider taking on, and for me, a developer, which kind of goes to something you mentioned, that would afford me, conservation tax credits or donations, which I could use against my development. So that would have worked out great. But as it turned out, the city insisted on having the property. That's certainly an option that, could be offered up to, the Oppenheimers or whoever. Could be some form of in lieu situation involving open space with, conditions of donation. So it really is not a great expense for them, but in return, to be able to develop properties within their development that would have been like passive, they can actually create good, you know, housing resources or commercial or whatever. That's a excellent idea, and actually I've talked to the Oppenheimers about it at one point, but just briefly to go through a couple of these things. Obviously, development of the property, that's just, land development is not what cities do. You can't afford it, trust me, and you're not equipped to do it. And in my mind, the sort of the land development component that the city had to offer, it's already done, which is basically taking county property that would have one value, having it come into the city, assign density to it. That automatically increases the value, as you can see from the 1.5 to the 2 million that that has happened as a result of that. To me, that's the city's development thing. The second part was unrestricted property disposal. Yes, I understand generally in situations like this, correct me, these properties do have to go out sort of for bid to the general public. Unless maybe there's some situation internally where you're working with some developer or some other situation within, you know, your city's powers, and I don't know exactly what that looks like. But right now, I mean, between now and say May, I would use this time to really, you can't show the property now. And in real estate, you don't want property, you don't want things out for sale and have them sit, because then, you know, you start losing value. So I would say that the goal should be come up by, you know, May, if you've decided you just want to put out there and have it bid by anyone. That's probably the time to do it. In the interim, you could sort of soft pedal developers or the land trust or other situations and see, you know, how that works out and if it's possible. I talked to the BLM about doing some portions of exchanges with them for that property, and it wasn't for property that they had here locally. It was, they can trade anywhere. But in your case, if you wanted to do something with them, it would be more specific to a certain need, like the water tower.
Jeff, I just want to tie back to just I think the question that was presented was, do you recall the developable acreage?
Well, yes and no. I mean, if you want to go and rechannel like I did, you could take a good portion of that out of the floodplains. You don't have to take it out of the floodplains. You can do base flood elevations. It just creates, you know, more things. We sort of, only 40% of our property was actually developed by the time we got working around the avalanche areas and things like that. So nothing is in that kind of setting. So let's say it's, let's say it's 50%. But I don't think that, for realistically, I don't know that that is the concern, because I don't really see the best for the property itself or the community for it to be developed. I think it's better as open space, and you can monetize it through these other situations. Let's see, what was it? Well, other, well, I think, in a nutshell, you guys have identified the key things. You can exchange it in whole or part. You can try to work out something with the density and use it like TDRs and create a number value where another developer within the town can actually pay, like it's done in the county, to have increased density. There's many ways to monetize this. And I think, Brian has given you the basics of where you should focus initially.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
So can I just clarify, Jeff?
Yes.
So you said 50% of this could be developable?
Well, if it was similar to.
Are those the numbers? Because I'm looking at the floodplain information right here
The
within
floodplain is not,
Yeah.
so with regards to the floodplain is an A zone.
Mhm.
You can, you can plat in the floodplain, you just have to have base flood elevations, I believe that's correct, Diane. So the concern would be, what are the avalanche areas more than the floodplain,
Mhm.
I would say. And I would say, roughly speaking, looking at what we experienced, maybe 50% or 40% of the areas would have been in that sort of blue zone, so we stayed out of there. That valley is pretty much the same width. It has pretty much the same mountainous terrain around it. So, you could, I'd say 50%.
Okay.
But it's not all like upfront or in the middle or in the end. I mean, it just,
Mhm.
you just have to kind of lay it out like we're laying it out. And realistically, with the run of roads and water and sewer and everything else, that's just not realistic.
Mhm.
I mean, yeah.
Jeff, didn't we do a Lomer with Chuck Brockway? Back,
Yes, there would have been, but it would have just shown exactly what you're seeing there as far as floodplain is
The map
concerned.
showed it.
yeah,
What Chuck did for me was a totally different thing. Well, we did a Lomer to get it from A to X. And when there was issues on getting it to X, we decided just to rechannelize it. And then that eliminated the whole
Right.
thing. So, but that's $500,000. You don't wanna do that. So I guess bottom line is, the cities aren't in the development business. And if it was a property that you decided you wanted to put your city hall out there, that would maybe be a different situation, because that's not really a development. But, that's my feeling.
We did, and Jeff brought it up, chat about briefly with this property, talking about seeing if it was reasonable to exchange it for the property that the water tower is on. I think that should be high up there on the list of things to consider. Or, maybe it's not a full swap, but something of that, to get that piece of land that is on.
Could I add something to that? So the good news here is, we've always, through time, but through changes, the city has not had the opportunity to really go ahead and get the property formally appraised. This is an incredible tool that you have.
Mhm.
And when you're looking at, trading, say, with the BLM, say, for that property, they also have to have a valuation, and that's, other than the fact that your tank's sitting on it, it's mountain overlay area. It doesn't probably have that much value, so you may be giving, 5 acres for 5 acres or 2 acres.
Yeah.
And that still doesn't impact this $2 million valuation much at all.
Mhm.
And you could think about, squaring off I think this 9 acre piece you have out there, this is the city parcel that's in the midst of our project. You could maybe square part of that off with them because they have a cut in there. But I think really what we should do here in the beginning of the year is I should schedule something on behalf of Strayhorn to really have us all talk about what do you really want to see out there? I mean, do you want to see fields that you take care of, or do you want to see, pump parks for mountain bikes to tie into the trails? We need to come to some sort of a conclusion there so that you know what you're dealing with when you're talking to the BLM. And make Diane happy.
Thank you for bringing that up, Robin, the water tower. Thoughts?
Well, I mean, we've been working on this for 14 years or so. And Jeff and I have had several conversations about this, and I always felt like development of that 61 acres was not appropriate. I have concerns with fire issues. One road in, one road out. And, I think there should be nothing developed on that property. That's my 2 cents worth.
Pretty neat open space out there.
Yeah,
Cool. And to have it as recreational opportunities. too,
Yeah.
so.
a lot of room for a recreational amenity out there.
Likewise.
Yeah, no,
I mean, I think you're absolutely right, Diane, but I think also part of this is I think the city needs to be open-minded in how it's gonna present this in terms of value. If you just say, no, we're not gonna let anything go out there, well, then you don't have a $2 million piece of property. So, I think you have to be thoughtful in how you're structuring this. And I've done a lot of this with the land trust and other situations. I'm happy to share my experiences and maybe, resources or connections to help you through this, but I am a developer, so don't be afraid of me.
Chad's got a hand raised.
Yeah, can I just chime in on that last statement Jeff said? I mean, the nice thing about the LWCF program is that you can have both. I mean, you can get compensated for the full value by the BLM, and it's conserved. So, I mean, that's my pitch for engaging with the land trust on that avenue.
Chad, you referred to the timeline on something like this. Do you have like a general idea on timelines that you've seen in the past?
When everything like the access is fairly cut and dry, it can go fairly quickly. The biggest hurdle is getting the appraisal. The BLM has a list of appraisers that they have approved. And getting on the schedule can sometimes take, it can take a few months for them to complete the appraisal. But once that's in place, assuming that the application has gone through the right channels and been approved, it can be, within the year.
Not a public comment discussion tonight, this discussion on the thing, but
I could rezone it like A40 and make it just ranch property, one owner. Somebody might wanna have their horses out there.
that's true. So I think,
Depends on if we
Yeah.
get rid of it.
yeah, I think we're kind of a place in the discussion where we've heard from kind of Brian, the council, and some of the people asked to present, that it feels like we could, start working in the direction of giving Brian a little bit, or staff some direction about where we are on the spectrum here in terms of what we're looking to do with this property, so we can kind of suggest some boundaries in that. I'm hearing a lot of discussion about open space. and looking into exchange of the property. And not leaving stones unturned on what those possibilities could look like in terms of securing the land under the water tower. And with that timeline, also considering looking at what I'll call the Strayhorn Park and, you know, those 9 acres and what we're doing that a little bit in conjunction with discussing, how this could look for, you know, if we went down the direction of doing an exchange of property or a BLM deal.
Well, I think we could probably safely get rid of option A here, right? We know we're not gonna develop the property, so that'd be one less thing.
Check.
Option D seems like something we'd all be interested in pursuing as far as how we can not exchange the whole thing or pieces of it and what you just said.
I was just gonna ask Brian for a little education on the property disposal. Is that like taking property off like for a buyer, basically, or will you explain the property disposal element a little bit more?
I don't know a ton about it other than reading the state statute on it, but my understanding is that, yeah, we can, public notice that we're going to have an auction and then, people show up and their little paddles and we have an auction.
Yeah, first you decide what you're gonna sell
Yeah.
it for, you have a meeting, and I think
Okay.
there's public comment. Kind of a two-step process, and then,
So it's a presentation of option, but not fully a recommendation.
Right.
Okay.
These are very, very high level. Like I said, I think if you guys provide direction, we can dive into the next steps in a much greater detail in the future.
I don't think we'd wanna auction it off. Is that true? Does anybody else feel like?
I would.
I don't,
Okay.
yeah,
You're A and B
and B
And see.
and C.
and C, and what about the selling the development rights? Cause if we sell the development rights, then somebody else could develop out there, correct? Or,
So, how that would be structured is we'd pass a city ordinance that says we're gonna have a transfer development rights program. This parcel would be the sending zone, and then somewhere else in town would be the receiving zone. And we would
okay,
have
okay,
the hypothetical land developable units, however many dwellings that would be.
at like another location.
Right, and yeah, we'd sell
Okay.
those off to somebody
Okay.
else.
Still seems like a useful tool.
Yeah. Yes.
So it sounds like continuing to explore D
D.
and considering E a little bit.
Mhm.
And I think what about the idea with the land trust, working with them?
Does that fall under kind of exchange of the property or is that a different category?
Yeah, I would think that would probably be, either C or D, or that would fall.
Oh, okay.
Not quite sure on the mechanics of actually doing it.
And then where does everybody land on F?
I guess my question would be, do we need to get rid of it at this point? So would be kind of landed to F. I know we wanted to see what we had, which is great, but now we have to really decide if we want to even part ways with it, so,
Right.
or
I guess, yeah, do we wanna manage that land? That's the other thing. I mean, is somebody going out there and frequently making sure that people aren't dumping or all other items, like thinking about, yeah. It's a lot of acreage to cover,
Yeah.
and is that what we wanna be responsible for?
Well, we haven't been in the past, I mean, even though it's our land, I mean, we don't mow it, we don't irrigate it, we don't,
Doing nothing.
yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know if Kurt, you go out and drive out that direction at all?
Not this time of year.
Right.
And I think just going back to kind of like when we started this discussion and the reason for the appraisal, I think the intention of the land was never to just bank the land, hold on.
Intended to
It
be
was-
an asset.
It was intended to be an asset that then can be utilized, for what the city sees fit. And so I think, this appraisal was a good step to understanding the value of the property. And so now it's kind of time to move into what are we gonna do with that value? And, you know, what does that look like? So, Brian, do you feel like you have a fair bit of direction to kind of move on to the next steps? And just to reiterate, this was, you know, tonight is not, we're
It's
deciding
idea
what's happening. It's
Yeah.
idea generating, it's discussion, it's giving, you know, our community development director guidance of kind of where we want to head and next steps, and, giving everyone an opportunity to kind of look at the appraisal, understand the value, and appreciate that we have an asset like that within the city that now we can consider how to utilize it moving forward.
I actually had something important to say. With regards to F or whatever it is, maybe Rick needs to look back on the annexation agreement and how the asset and the value was established in what the intent was. Because when Kaplan did his report, it was for participation in, impact fees and capital improvements. And if you're gonna take this money, which is fine by me, but if you're gonna take this money and do it this way, this sort of becomes like the Haley situation, which was, what's the fancy Latin word? Ultra-virus or something, sounds like some horrible disease. Where a city is taking, you know, money or collecting assets and utilizing them in ways in which they weren't intended and collected for. So like I said, I'm part of the annexation agreement. I'm fine, you know, use it any way you want. But just be aware, because if you don't do it correctly, and then you have new annexations coming in, and you've created precedents or confusion, then, you know, you don't want that. So just do that.
Well, yeah, it was designed to offset the impacts of your development, right?
Well, no, it was.
Well, that's what
It was to
annexation
buy, it was to
is.
buy into the assets. It was a capital.
Well, I disagree with you on that, Jack. I mean, it's whatever we wanted it to be because it was annexation. And it was supposed to offset the impacts of the development. And so that could be sewer, that could be streets, that could be a new city hall if we need one, so.
I think that'll be part of the due diligence process, of course, as we're, you know, figuring out which direction we're taking this, legitimizing kind of all the elements of it. I think, I appreciate you expressing the concern, but I feel like that's been part of this discussion too, is looking at the original intended use of it, bringing it back to the table. It's been sitting around and now kind of.
But it is the only,
Activating it.
aside from the other piece of property that Jeff deeded us, it's the only other monetary, something that we could get money for to for the annexation fees, because right now it's just sitting out there, so.
Mhm.
And we could certainly use the money.
If there's nothing else from the council, then I think I'll go ahead and close out the discussion and say thank you to Brian for presenting that to us.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, well, that concludes our agenda for tonight's meeting. Again, thank you. Thanks to Robin and John. And at this time, I would take.
Second.
Merry Christmas.
Everyone.
Everyone.
Merry Christmas and have a happy holiday.
I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Yeah, thank you, Sean.
Yes, sir.
Merry Christmas, Sean.
Bye.
Bye.
So we